All right, so welcome to our roundtable. Let's talk about accessibility and design, hosted by AIGA South Dakota. So for those of you who are not familiar, AIGA stands for the American Institute for Graphic Arts, and we are the local South Dakota chapter. My name is Molly O'Connor, and this is my 7th year on the board of AIGA South Dakota. I'm also a practicing designer and associate design director at a graphic design agency in Sioux Falls called Lemonly. But that's only one of the parts of the reasons that I'm here today to talk to you. I'm here because I'm passionate about accessibility and inclusivity in design. And I fiercely believe that by showing up and having conversations like we're going to have here today, we're making a crucial step in creating meaningful change. Some of you might recognize me from the accessibility panel that we hosted back in the spring of 2022. And I'm really excited to announce that all 4 of our panelists will be joining us here today and taking part in the conversation with us and helping answer your questions. So I want to just take a moment to quickly reintroduce them. When I call your name, you're welcome to raise your hand or use an emoji, or if you want to remain anonymous, that's fine too. I'll start with Kendra. Kendra Gotsleben is the Marketing Communications Specialist at the Center for Disabilities in at the University of South Dakota Sanford School of Medicine. That's always such a mouthful, Kendra. She is the author and spokesperson for Living a Life with Rare Disease and Disability, and she is also the founder and executive director for the nonprofit organization Rare by Design. Tana Zwart is a self-employed media manager with experience largely in nonprofits. She is a disability advocate and chair for the Disability Awareness and Accessibility Review Board for the city of Sioux Falls, as well as a former national ambassador for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. We have Caitlin Martinez. She is a senior developer at Click Rain here in Sioux Falls. That is Lemonly's sister agency, where she specializes in developing accessible websites for clients and serves as the website accessibility expert for the agency. And our last panelist from our panel in 2022 is Hector Curiel. He is originally from Lima, Peru, and he is part of the community of artists in Sioux Falls, and he specializes in bringing out the area's natural beauty in his paintings. And last but not least, my co-host from the panel, Tim Murray. He is a designer at Matt Jensen Marketing. He is an adjunct instructor at Augustana University, and he is the president of AIGA South Dakota. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you previous panelists and the AIGA board and everyone else here who showed up today for joining us. The format for this roundtable will be very conversational. We are all coming together here today as both learners and experts in this space, so please unmute, ask questions, and share your experiences with us. If you don't feel comfortable unmuting, you're also welcome to type your questions or any sort of comments in the chat as well, and we'll make sure that those come to the surface. Okay, I'd like to kick off today with a story and a prompt. This morning, I was in bed scrolling on Instagram. I know it's a terrible habit, but I came across a very timely post from the Washington Post. 2 days ago, the U.S. State Department sent out an order to phase out their typeface Times New Roman. They've been using it for 20 years, and they're replacing it with Calibri. I was excited. The decision was a move purely to make their materials more accessible. So serif fonts like Times New Roman are less accessible to people with certain disabilities who might rely on character recognition technology. And they can also introduce visual recognition problems for those with learning disabilities. So I was really, really excited about Calibri, which has never happened in my life. I've never really thought about Calibri, but this is a win. And I don't even read government documents. So it's not about the exact use of those documents or who is accessing those. And it's more about the example that they're setting, that small shift that can make the world more accessible for everyone. I'm especially excited because headlines like that, even if you don't read the article, and let's face it, many of us do not read the articles, they help bring awareness to the importance of accessibility, and they can help spark conversation and create a ripple effect for change. And so that's what we're doing here today. I want to open up to y'all and ask you, what is something that you or your company has done to make your products more accessible? I've had some time to think about this, so I have an example and I'll start it out so you can think about it and jump in after this. A few years ago at Lemonly, with the help of our web accessibility expert, Caitlin Martinez, who can speak to this much better than I if you have any specific questions, but I'll tell you high level. We started implementing SVG files with all our final infographic deliverables. So infographics contain a lot of text, sometimes charts and imagery, and often when you see an infographic in the wild, it's posted as a JPEG or a PNG file. So for those with vision impairments, these file types block them out completely. They're just not accessible and they're too complex in the case of infographics to be remedied with alt text alone. With SVG files, similar to PDFs and unlike image files like JPEGs or PNGs, the content of an infographic can be accessed by a screen reader. So this is important, of course, even if it removes a barrier for a small group of people, but in fact, in the US has seen a rapid increase in the use of special equipment to consume content, an increase of 191% since 2018, with the highest percentage in South Dakota at 10.9%. And so that includes things like screen readers. So just doing that, making that change and making sure our clients were always equipped with these accessible file types was a really huge win for us. It meant that we were meeting people where they are. We were humanizing people and we were sending a message that they matter. Okay, that's it. That's all I have. I'm stopping talking. I'm giving the floor to y'all. I want to hear about your accessibility wins.
I can jump in what ClickRain does. So we've been doing accessible websites for quite a while. And we actually put it in our proposals and in our scopes, like, we're going to make your website doubly accessible. It's not like an ask from the client. It's like, nope, we're doing it. This is just the right thing to do. And it's just something we automatically put into our proposals now.
Yeah, I work at Blend Interactive, and we actually have a QA practice manager, and I can't speak fully onto what she does, but make sure that our websites are accessible and available for everyone. So like we go through a whole system and run Lighthouse on the previous website that we're updating, and then check accessibility scores after and make sure that it's improved.
Lindsay, could you talk a little bit more about Lighthouse, that tool?
Yeah, so Lighthouse is when you go to inspect a website and you see like the panel with all the coding on the side, it's a plugin for Chrome. So you can run it on mobile and desktop. You just select which one in the intro, and it'll tell you accessibility, performance score. Can't remember what else is on there, but it has a score of 5 different categories in there. So
Anybody from the content creation side or the design side have a win or a tip or something that they learned that they'd like to share?
I can share. So I'm Emily from the Mohawk Students Association. So I'm just getting into this and I'm learning a lot already. The SVG thing is super informative. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I've just been doing like small things, but it feels like a little win in my heart. So we post a lot of like jobs on our website and a lot of like documents for students to download, informative documents. So I've been working to make the PDFs accessible so that they read like in order with screen readers, and like really small stuff like the alt text. Like I'm starting to understand like the severe importance of doing those things on like our website and newsletter and stuff like that. So very, very small wins, but like I'm getting into it.
Small but impactful. Definitely.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's one thing at a time, you know, like I started too with the alt tags, and then you learn something else like the SVG files, which now I'm like, oh, I'm going to write that down. And it's just one thing leads to another. You learn something else and you just start putting it into everyday's actions, and it just becomes something you just do, and you don't even think about it as accessibility because you just do it.
I love that you say that you just do it and you don't think about it. That's really what I hope all accessibility things can become in our society. It's just normalized and part of our everyday thinking.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say that a lot of people think with like screen readers, you know, it's only for individuals who are blind or low vision or whatnot. But like for me, example, I used Kurzweil when I went to college. And Kurzweil is a, like, they scan the books and then it'll read the book to you. So it's not even just individuals who have, you know, low vision. It's also somebody that maybe has dyslexia and can't, you know, reading that is too challenging. So they're oral. And so that's what a screen reader with such things is. Maybe they're a person that learns better, gains more knowledge through listening. And so that's an invisible disability, you know, that you don't see. But some people just in general are learn better listening. And so that's just another notch to think about the accessibility. It might not even just be an individual who have vision loss. They're just a learner that learns better, like hearing, or also maybe reading and hearing at the same time. You know, because as individuals, when we all learn in different ways, and sometimes having the knowledge come in two different formats is also a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
I will say too that I'll turn my video on so I'm not just this invisible person, but I think a win too is being able to educate our clients, right? Who come to this website presentation and they have all these expectations, and then we say, oh no, you can't actually do that. But then being able to back that up with information of like, this is exactly why. And something that we've done at Click Green is we actually have built out some blog posts. And I've actually come to a meeting, and rather than me kind of like explaining all of it to them and having it go over their head, I'm like, here's some blog posts that we've written that you can reference later, so you're not just overwhelmed and inundated with all of this information, and really be able to take this in and kind of understand a little more about what I'm talking about. So that was a big win to say like, yes, this is important, and here's a little more information about why it is important.
And I think that's one of the key things of you guys as designers, content creators, in that aspect of when a company is coming to you, or an organization or anybody's coming to you to create things, that is, like Caitlin said, you just do it. But when you do it, and then what Casey said is like you explain it, is that everything is teaching and knowledge and helping them, but they don't realize how much their company can grow or can reach a broader market, no matter what the market is or individuals, is that that's what they should be doing. It's best practice. It's what everybody should be doing. But, you know, it's still kind of new to people. And so you guys as the creators and designers, you guys are on that forefront. And that's why it's exciting to see so many of you here, because you are the connecting piece to that company and helping them see the light of the importance of why it needs to be done no matter what.
Hi, this is Coley Ernst. I'm with ClickRain on the content team, and something that we've been doing a lot lately, or at least thinking about, is just cognitive load. So obviously that has to do with kind of what Kendra was speaking to with dyslexia and people just consuming information visually in different ways. And so just trying to really think about that as we put content on the site, how much spacing should we include? Obviously that dips into design, but on the content side, we do a lot of the contribution. So we kind of see a lot of that live through on the back end. And then also just thinking about, heading structure and breaking things out and making sure that people can follow the page really easily, not only from the screen reader perspective, because that's important there too, but also as someone consumes that content, how are they following it, understanding it, not getting lost, not reading long sentences, things like that.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think in my experience,
Hey, Hector.
hi, how are you? Yeah, I want to, yes, talking about accessibility, I mostly understand about empathy, about understand there's other people probably can receive the information you provide or the product you make in a different way. And we need to understand and put in their shoes, how make in my case, I am an artist, and how make my art accessible to other people who probably can see it or even can touch. No, we talk about 3D art. I remember during my art residencies, one time I had to work in some nursing home, work with people in memory care or people with disability on their hands, and I'm trying to let them to live the experience to be artists. And there are times when I hold the hands to them and trying to make their hands for them, helping to at least experiment doing something with art, no? Or with people in memory care, or even people who that are blind, trying to, how can I make my art accessible to them? But I think it starts from the fact you need to understand people are different, and you have to be patient and try to have empathy to understand how to reach them.
I love that, Hector. I think that's a really great point. I think it's also worth noting that when including accessibility in your products, in your content, you're not just creating that content for somebody with a permanent disability, but maybe also somebody with a situational limitation. A good example, I mean, you can find examples, I think, in all of the cases, but one that I always rely on are screen captions, including screen captions. If you are in like a crowded airport and it's really noisy, people also use them for teaching their children how to read and turning them on when they're watching something. So there are other benefits, also known as curb cut effect, to accessibility.
I was thinking about the curb cut effect as we were getting started, because talking about shoveling snow and how it's, it's nice for most people to be able to walk on a clear sidewalk, but it's essential for people that are using a wheelchair. And a lot of the things that we're talking about, whether it's alt tags for screen readers or, properly structuring your content so that it's easier or lower on the cognitive load. I think those, like if we design things well for every audience, it benefits every other audience. And I think I was thinking of like audiobooks or screen readers for people that are, in my case, holding a baby, and it's nice to have another way to access that content that's not just visual.
And I think,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's, we all age too, and we don't really think about losing our hearing and our sight as a disability, which it very much is. I mean, and just that we all will be affected by disability at some point in our life, even if it's a temporary layup or we end up having a loved one who's diagnosed with a rare disease. it affects us in some way more than you think it does.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well, we can't talk about like curb cuts without me wanting to join in. So yeah, and I'll echo some of those. I mean, I think and we're talking about like physical design of city design of sidewalks, of streets, of curb cuts. You know, yeah, we're not just design the idea of you know, making crosswalks or crossing spaces more narrow, easier for people to get across. It's not just for someone in a wheelchair. It's for lots of people. It's for the elderly. It's for someone who broke their leg. It's for pregnant people. It's for people. And the point, you know, the one point in my life that where I feel like I noticed it most is when I was pushing like a baby stroller around. Suddenly I had 4 extra wheels and had to maneuver in these kind of varying spaces of accessibility. So when we design universally, I mean, it just makes it easier for literally everybody.
I really like
But people, so there's going off like the building, you know, structurally, but also thinking design is there's checking the boxes where it's ADA compliant. But what people need to realize is just checking the boxes does not mean that it's totally true accessible. And then the other thing is when you go that extra mile, like, so a perfect example physically is the push buttons. Push buttons are not ADA required, but they're a wonderful invention. And I love them, and I wish they were everywhere. So when buildings are being built, in my mind, you're already spending lots of money. So, I mean, I know those they are more expensive. I know they were more expensive, you know, back in the day. But the thing is, a push button doesn't just help an individual with a disability. And so trying to break down as designers or saying, giving these examples of like, this push button doesn't just help a person in a wheelchair, just like Zach said. The push button could help someone with a kid in a stroller getting in and maybe carrying something else. And so that aspect of so many people are like, oh, that'll help somebody with a disability. And it's like, you got to look at it broader. If it works for someone with a disability, if it makes something easier, then it's going to help the universal population, because to a certain degree, we always like to kind of take the easy way out in certain situations, you know. So I mean, so it's like if it's easier, it'll work better. Just like curb cuts are bike friendly, walker friendly, you know, if somebody has a walker. I mean, it's that kind of helping companies, designers that you guys are working with see that. And sometimes we can't always blame them because that's not their journey. But as you guys are in this field and are doing it, you can be that, hey, did you think of, and this is a population, or this is why you should do it, you know. And I think that's what excites me is you guys are there to kind of help them get to that point.
Absolutely, Kendra. I think bringing it back to the digital space, things like SVGs or alt text, things like that are also they help out with SEO. Correct me, people who know better than I do. Okay, so that's a good selling point, right, for the client if they're maybe like, I don't see the value. But regardless, there's value in many areas. And so I think it's a curb cut. It's the same situation, or a push button. I think we're push button people here. We're not just here for the ADA accessibility. We want the push buttons too.
Everyone, my name's Rebecca Hoyt. My pronouns are she, hers. I really appreciate the conversation. I guess as someone who uses quite a bit of AT to access the virtual digital world, when we talk about the curb cut effect, I want to like push back a little bit or maybe offer a different perspective. Like, I am disabled. I'm a fantastic employee and asset to spaces I'm in. Like, why does there have to be an added benefit to non-disabled people to allow me to be in the room and participating? So maybe like not all of your clients are there yet, but I think the real loss is like all of the innovation, talent, skills that like are left out from the disability community if you don't do these things. Not like who else doing these things benefits. So just the thought.
That's a really good that's a really good addition to make. It's not just, there are times when we need to sell it to people that are either clients who are slower to come on board, or team members or whoever who might not be willing to do the extra thing, but it's worth it for one person. It's worth it to make it accessible to every person, each person. I think I appreciate you adding that. I would like to related to that sort of, as we were preparing this conversation, one of the questions that came up was, are there, like, especially for those of you who have more experience with this, are there examples of brands or facilities who have done this really well? Like someone that, like a really innovative solution that has been beneficial to you? Are there any standouts that you would mention or call out?
I know this is probably required, but hospitals, I often find myself carrying like 2 children trying to go in a hospital. And it's made it much easier, like take a stroller in. So they obviously have to do it well. But that's what sticks out to me of like, oh, I don't have to worry when I go there because they make it pretty easy.
Sure.
Except for the rooms. The rooms are a little small, I will say, but actually getting in the hospital works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Caitlin, because I spent some time in the hospital this summer and I couldn't take a shower because their showers weren't accessible. And I'm like, but this is the operations floor, like people are getting their knees replaced. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very accessible to get in, and then, but once you're staying there, I don't know. It was really interesting to me that they wouldn't have an accessible shower.
I don't have a specific brand to point to, but I do notice when a website has accessibility options. I think they're becoming more common, but not common enough. I don't see them as much as I'd like to. So when I see a really good one, I take notice and I usually share that.
Another
For sure.
example, like what Molly said, is that's what brands don't, what you don't realize is because brands aren't doing it, when somebody finds a brand or a company that does do it, no matter what we're talking about, if it's a consumer, like clothing, whatever, you have a customer for life because we don't see it. And when we don't see it on a computer or on whatever, it's just like, they don't care. So then you might not go back to that company. But when you find a company that does it and does it in a way where it's not a patronizing way, that you can really tell that they're doing it because they want to be open for everyone who's shopping or trying to gain knowledge, that they become a reliable source to the whole population.
That's a really good point.
Yes, I totally agree with you. In fact, I was back to my country in Peru, and last November, and I took my mother on the plane. We used American Airlines. I don't know if I can say the brand, but I was amazed. The treat, they make a huge difference because when I put in my mother she needs special service, and they tried to give us the best service and my experiments and make our traveling so comfortable. So what you say is totally true. No, when you find a company who really care for their customers and trying to make accessible for everyone, you definitely want to back to them. No?
Yeah.
I'll chime in. I saw a cool example a couple weeks ago, sort of a niche example, but Sony PlayStation announced that they created a new accessibility controller for their gaming system. I mean, idealistically, you would want those to drop when the console drops, but it's cool that they're at least, acknowledging that. And even like in any video game you play, or at least good ones, there are always colorblind accessibility features. So like to discern like teams or what have you, depending on the game. But I thought that was really cool, and just I don't quite understand it. Just the design of this controller I'm mentioning, it's like totally different, for a typical gamer who can use both their hands, and have that cognitive ability. It's totally different. So I thought that was pretty neat to see.
That's really
Google has really, like as an employees too, like Google has really kind of goes off the controller things, but Google has really created, a lot of things trying to make everything there accessible, but with that type of that's what made me think of that controller, that Google is definitely one of those companies and brands that also employee wise making their environment accessible for employees, but then also for people to be able to access it.
The example that I thought of was, it veers a little bit into inclusivity, but I'm not that familiar with the Marvel universe, but we watched Hawkeye with my kids. The Hawkeye is like, he's an archer. Part of the storyline is that he's sort of losing his hearing in the show. And then also along the process, one of the other characters has no hearing, only signs. And I thought it was really interesting that it was like it wasn't a show about deaf people, and it wasn't a show about hearing impairment necessarily, but it was such a part of it, was just baked into the story, and it was interesting and it was compelling, and like it was a plot point, but not the only plot point by any means. And I thought it was like, I appreciated that, and I also appreciated that my kids were asking questions about signing, and it was like here's just, it's a part of the fabric of society, and here's a complex storyline that includes it. So I thought that was really, it wasn't what I expected, but I thought it was really cool.
That's so rare, right? For the character not to be completely defined by that, by their disability.
Yeah. And I thought, like, to your point earlier about how did you put it, permanent disability versus situational limitations, like you see this gray. I'm at the age where I'm starting to need reader's glasses. So like as I'm 10 years ago, I might have designed things like really small font on a low contrast just because I thought it looked cool, and now I'm like, ooh, me and other people are going to need that a little bit bigger. So it's like, as you sort of, Kendra mentioned, you're on your own journey, but as I start to have my own needs, it's interesting to see a character in a show who has needs that develop situationally.
Tim, I think that's a really good point, because sometimes I feel that designers are taken aback, or maybe don't want to design as accessible in an as accessible way, because they're sacrificing design.
Yeah.
But that's where I think you point to, like, first of all, if it's not accessible, it's not good design, just like period, right? And then I think all those other points about the situational aspects and permanent disabilities, like it's just a win-win.
Yeah. Cameron, thanks for putting that link in the chat.
Yeah, Cameron, I am familiar with not relying on color alone to communicate information in charts, in web design, things like that, but I had never thought about games, probably because I'm not a big gamer, but I think that's fascinating. I'm interested in that. I want to see an example of that, like you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, usually the one that comes to mind is like, in team-based games, whether like your team is green to signify good guys or bad for bad guys, it's like basically it goes from orange to blue. So that's been like a staple. But that sort of opens up a whole other conversation about color accessibility in design, because that's something that I haven't really thought too much about. Like even just to preface, I'm a designer. I do a lot of branded content. So as previously stated, Molly said, like, a lot of times we design things to look cool, so like, and not always the cool things are the most accessible. So that's something that I've been more conscious about moving forward with design. Curious if there's anyone out there, if there's any specific tools or any practices you guys use for color accessibility.
Yeah, I can't think of what it's called, but there's this website that you go on to, and I used it at the end of college when I was starting to talk to people at businesses and agencies. They were saying like, your designs are really cool, but I'm not sure how accessible they are. So there's this tool that'll show you if your I'll see if I can find the link to it, but it'll show you if your colors and your text, like it bases it off a certain percentage of readability or something, and it'll tell you if it works or not. I'll try to link it.
I actually, I have one that I use that I will share here in the chat. It's a plugin for Chrome called Color Contrast Checker, and it's color spelled with a U, and it's a super well designed, easy to use checker that is based on WCAG standards, and I recommend you have something like that, like Kinsey's talking about, just something available to you so that before you send that design out the door, you make sure that you have the right contrast. I mentioned charts when we were talking about relying on color alone to communicate information. I think that has been one of the biggest struggles personally as an primarily infographics designer, graphic designer, is we do deal with a lot of charts, lots of pie charts, things like that. And it's so easy to have a pie chart and then have the key next to it with just like, little dots or squares of color that define it. But if you can't see all those colors, you have no idea what that chart is communicating. So that's been a little bit hard because you don't want to put too much design on it. You want to keep it simple. You don't want to like overdo it, but you do need some sort of pattern or icon or something else that defines it a little bit better, so that somebody coming to it who has a form of color blindness can access that information too.
One quick note, if in the spirit of accessibility, if you're in a place where you can't talk or you have a question that you don't want to voice, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll surface that through that. I was also this is a super nitty gritty tool that I've been using a lot, but I set up a short code in Illustrator to flip my design into black and white and to turn it back off. And I'll find out what that shortcut is and post it somewhere. But I do the same thing in Photoshop. I set a black and white filter at the very top layer. And so I'll periodically click that layer on, just see how the contrast looks to make sure it's still readable in a black and white or a low contrast setting. So that's pretty handy. Again, that's super nitty gritty, but.
I know there's one that I've seen Lemonly use. I need to find the link. That's actually really helpful when they do like a style guide and they send it over to us to do a website. And it's like, it literally is, here's all your colors and here's the and it creates this little chart of this color works with this color at this text size, and so that way for a designer, it's a lot to individually check everything. Whereas it's literally this chart that's you can use this color and this color at 24 pixels and above, and you can use this one and this one anytime. And so it's actually, I'll find the link, but it's I feel like it makes web design much easier when you can just oh, quick check, yep, I can use this together, versus one offs. You're just it's so easy to miss.
Yes.
I love that, Caitlin. Thank you for saying that. Those are, they're super easy to make. Do you have the link that creates that we use to?
I'm looking at finding it, but if you happen to just have it because you use it more,
I can,
otherwise
I
I'll
can
find
find it. And
Nick He's helping us out and he shared it.
Nick, he's on it. Nick also works at Livenly. Yeah, it's so nice because you just put in all the hex codes and you're set. It'll just create it for you. You could screenshot it if you wanted to. We usually redesign it so it's a little easier for somebody who has no idea what they're looking at to use. But if you have brand colors that you're using all the time, it's nice to have that to just quick check, like, can I put this color, this brand color on this brand color? No, okay. And then you know, and then eventually if you're using those brand colors all the time, you just know it by heart. But
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That's great. Similar to, I think Hector was talking about empathy, and I think it, like this whole conversation, I first started thinking about it because for a season, actually Hector and I were both Spanish interpreters, and one of my clients, in addition to only speaking Spanish, was also low vision, and so I would go with him to all these doctor's appointments and different, navigating all kinds of different situations, and it was astounding to me how, like, kind of contrasting both sides, like how some things were so accessible and some things were so not accessible. But I think it's really hard, I think, for people who don't have a challenge like that to be able to understand it without walking through a bunch of situations where it matters or where it affects you personally. I'm just curious about how, just practically speaking, how to sort of systematically help people empathize. And I don't have an answer for that.
that's a great question, Tim. I love that.
Before I came to Epicosity, I've been here about 6 months. I worked for a large independently owned medical clinic, and I was the marketing director. And I was tasked with what's called Section 1557 of the Office of Civil Rights. And that pertains to language accessibility when you're in a healthcare facility. We were not compliant with this particular section. So I was tasked with bringing us up to compliance. So I had to, of course, read all the exciting literature on that. And I had to drag us kicking and screaming into, you just have to be that squeaky wheel. And I got it, you'll see, like at a pharmacy, I see them at Walmart pharmacy where it says point to your language, and they have all the different things. That's part of it. Having an interpreter service and making sure your employees know how to access that. You just have to just keep saying it. People get tired of hearing you say accessibility or language or whatever you happen to be harping about, but they get on the wagon with you and they start to understand what you're trying to do and why we're doing it. Yeah, I don't have a language barrier, but someone else does. And it makes it very difficult for them to use our facility, and they're our patient, and they have to be able to come here and speak with their physician. And so we got up to compliance, and it was hard, but I just kept at it. And I'm sure people got real tired of me, but that's, that's how I do it. I just jump in and make sure everybody comes along.
Emily has a question in the chat, similar along those same lines. Like, what are some practical ways to make, to think about accessibility for an English as a second language audience? She says she works at a school with a lot of international students. She mentions that images are a great way to communicate without a language barrier, but are there other?
This is Rebecca Hoyt. I work for the city of Madison, and our language access program is housed within our disability access services, which I think is a good way to think about access. But something that we are really trying to focus on is that accessibility of particularly text or a presentation starts when you start making it. So, using plain language is going to reach a broader audience generally, but also improve the quality of any translation services, and, make captioning more accessible, So, folks were talking about like organization of headings. I think that's also really important to think about if you're going to be translating things into other languages. It's just starting from the moment like your fingers hit the keyboard with like, how do I reach the broadest audience, rather than trying to like go back and fix something after it's already been drafted.
That's a great insight.
And I don't know if folks are familiar with plainlanguage.gov, but they have some really great little modules about tips for plain language. So I'll drop that in the chat.
Please do. I'm not familiar. Like you were saying, captions, writing it for those resources later. If you ever make SRT files are the caption files that you can include with your video. A lot of times now we have automatic captions, but there are resources that are pretty low cost where you can submit your video and they generate them automatically. And then there's also options through a lot of these services to change the language for just a little bit more money. So that's a really nice resource if you have multiple languages you need to translate it into. I recommend checking that out. So those are SRT files. I think Rev is the one that we use quite frequently, but there's a lot of options.
And if you do any video editing, Premiere Pro now has a baked in like AI driven auto captioning service that works pretty well. You have to do a little cleanup, but it saves a ton of time. That's right there. At least if you're a video editor, it's right there in your workflow.
I was gonna say what is nice and what is good to see is you are seeing like platforms like social media or Word documents, programs in general are seeing the importance of alt text and all of that. So some programs now do have that built in for you to check it, or like for Instagram, Facebook, you can go in and do the alt text for the photo. Downfall is I haven't figured out how to, when you've scheduled a post, you can't do the alt text. So I schedule the post it, and then I go in after it's gone live, and then I do the alt text. LinkedIn needs a larger amount of words for their alt text. Sometimes it's too short, or maybe I'm just wordy. Either way. But what I like about that too is that like not having a word limit with the alt text, because some of them, if you want to be like really true to describing it, especially if, like you said, like an infographic, if you're taking a photo of that and you put it, it's not a link, but you're putting the photo and it's a really full infographic, you can't put all, the alt text in there. But what I do like, you are seeing forms like that are creating or sharing knowledge that have that option to put that in. And so I think that's a good step, seeing the moving forward. So when you're sharing knowledge, that you can do that. And then with videos now with like Instagram and stuff, they've got captioning for that, so I think we're moving forward.
I agree, Kendra. I always appreciate when people turn on their captions and when on their stories and things like that. And, because it makes them accessible. I also just like to watch my videos with no sound, that's my preference. And so I like it when people pay attention to that detail and that they consider it.
There's a thing, a point I would like to discuss with you also. When we address be accessible to other people, sometimes we can go in the fine line to make so easy and undermine the capacity of those people. We think they can carry too much, or the knowledge we provide to them is probably too hard to understand. So we want to facilitate, want to make more access information, but kind of make more less information. I remember, as Tim mentioned, we been in the past have been Spanish interpreters, and sometimes interpret and schools with trying to make easy more access to the students with they're not fluent in English with tests and make some modifications, but I see the content that say was why more easy and less challenging than other regular kids. So it's, I think as a artists or creative people, we need to kind of not undermine when we're trying to provide accessibility to people with disabilities. Don't undermine their in the intelligence. No, they are still capable in some way. We need just to make sure they can understand, but still receive, as possible, the same information or content.
I know we're coming up close to the end of our time. If there's any last questions, I know everybody's got a busy day, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to have this conversation and contribute. I think we're all learning. I wanted to highlight that Molly has done a ton of work to put the first panel together and also this roundtable. Really want to thank our panelists for coming back and sharing their wisdom and insight and experience. And also, after this, Molly, I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but we're going to gather all the resources that people have been noting here, and board members, if you could compile things also in this document that we've got. But we'll send out an email of all the resources and tools that we've mentioned here. Molly, did you have any final thoughts before I didn't know if I cut you off? Sorry.
No, not at all. I am so happy. So many people came today, and that you're interested in talking about this, and that we're all trying to make each other better. And if you have interest in continuing this conversation or want more programming like this, let us know. We love feedback. Nobody likes giving feedback. When you send out the surveys, we didn't really get much from our panel, but if you have feedback, we want to hear it.